Shalom and welcome to another Chamor podcast from VERY Abedan, teaching Noahide Judaism for Messianic Hebrews. It is, what is it? Today is Tuesday, the 24th of December, 2024. That is Christmas Eve, so a very good nittel to everybody out there. Good nittel. What is good nittel? Well, we're going to talk about that today. It's the Jewish word for Christmas. Nittel comes from the word natal. It's actually natalis, which is a Latin word. The English word natal comes from the same root. Also, an Indonesian word for Christmas comes from the same word as well. And the Yiddish word for Christmas comes from the same word too. It refers to birth, giving birth. So last night, I should probably say on this night too, if in some places, if you missed last night, but most people tonight will be celebrating Christmas Eve as a regular holiday. But last night, as I said, was the first day of Nittelnacht. So Nittelnacht is the time which surrounds this day, the 24th. If you're in Judaism, we usually have 2 days for everything. There's a first day and a second day. If you miss everything on the first day, you get a second chance on the second day. And so Nittelnacht began last night when the sun goes down, and it goes on until midnight when we light a candle and we do some Torah study. But I'm going to talk to you about the full tradition of that today. So here is the article. Now, I started this as a little taster article on Friday just before we broke up for Shabbat, but I've rearranged it and I've extended it. I've got more in it, so it's a new show. It's not the same as last time. But we're going to go through it, and you're hopefully going to learn something about a very Jewish Christmas here. A lot of people say, Jewish Christmas? What are you talking about, Jewish Christmas? You'll see. Be patient, all right? Have a little listen, get a cup of tea, and sit back and enjoy some new information. I started to write this one on Sunday, the 24th of December, 2023, which is the date it shows it there. And this is our website. If you're not familiar with it, the website, the abedan website, is noahidejudaism.shul. Shul is spelled S-C-H-U-L-E. It means school in Yiddish and in most Germanic languages, I suppose. And that is our website. Beheading Esau with Messianic Noahide Judaism. Esau, of course, is the big bad guy in Judaism, but does get saved. At least his head gets saved. He gets a place in the world to come. So Esau, the big bad guy, even from amongst him, you can have an element brought into paradise. If we just cut off his head will get into paradise. It means that the rest of him may be picked apart by the beasts of the fields, and eventually the bones will be brought in too, which has got to do with the reference to giving Gog a burial place in Israel. And when you get a burial place in Israel, it means gaining a place in the world to come. So this is our mission, to try and give everybody a place in the world to come. And we have to deal with anti-Semitism. And these days, the mad thing is, you've got the state of Israel who are regurgitating a lot of anti-Semitic tropes against traditional Judaism. I think it's part of their big sort of gung-ho sort of effort to try and be like more macho than the macho men who abused the Jews for so many centuries. Well, we can't do anything much about them, but you'll learn a little bit about that today in here as well. So Nittel. 'Twas the time before Christmas, and all through the fog, not a rabbi was stirring, not one synagogue. What does that mean? You're going to find out in this article. Have yourselves a Hasmonean Christmas. What's Hasmonean Christmas? Well, the Hasmoneans were the dynasty that come from the Maccabees. And you'll find that a lot of this, actually, that we're looking at today, is rooted in Maccabean tradition. For example, Hanukkah is related to this as well. But let's have a look and see what we learn together. Far from popular myths about pagan origins of Christmas, many traditions surrounding it actually preserve elements of Hasmonean Judaism related to a 3-day event of darkest winter referred to as the Tekufat of Tevet in the Talmud, which is originally when the sun enters Capricorn, which had become the Julian Christmas among Edom, which is our word for Christendom, until Pope Gregory's 1582 calendar reform forced it to become the Gregorian December the 24th. And you might find that surprising. What happened in 1582? The calendar was changed. Pope Gregory removed 10 days from the calendar, and what used to be celebrated in the Tekufat, in the zodiac sort of month of Capricorn, became a little bit earlier, and many of the Jewish traditions associated with that time of the year also became early too, and ended up in Kislev rather than in Tevet. But well, you'll see a little bit more about that hopefully as we go by. So this is a little picture here to help you understand. Probably most of you know, but just in case you don't, the winter solstice, the Earth is a globe. Part of it spins on its axis, but it spins at an angle. And in the wintertime, the northern part is in shadow. The northern Arctic Circle is in shadow, and so the northern parts of the world get very short days, and the southern part of the world is facing towards the sun, so they have their summer at that time. They get very long days. And of course, Judaism developed in the northern hemisphere, so that's why it's focused on this time of the year as the darkest month of the year, darkest time of the year, rather than the longest days of the year, which would be in the southern hemisphere. Okay. If you didn't know that, you can study it more in an encyclopedia somewhere. So one occasionally comes across a Talmudist, for example me, referencing Avodah Zarah 6a to b, saying that Hanukkah revived observance of an ancient 8-day celebration originally established before the Tekufat of Tevet, that's Tevet 22nd, by Adam and Eve, following a period of fasting and abstinence. The previous year, the first year, they'd been fasting because they thought the end of the world was coming, while the northern hemisphere approached its darkest time of the year. So the following year, they established as a celebration, a memorial to be continued every year amongst mankind and their descendants. Hence, you have sort of solstice events, winter solstice events in all the religions around the world, all the pagan religions too, because we say in Judaism that all of those pagan religions are a result of distortions of ordinances given to them by Adam and Eve or Noah, things like that. So after the Tekufat of Tevet, Adam and Eve noticed the day got a little bit longer and appointed another 8-day celebration, which is also still respected in Judaism. And these two octave celebrations were corrupted by Romans into Saturnalia, which began on December 17th, that's the first 8th day, and calendar, December 25th, respectively, according to the Talmud. Of course, this is a very great simplification to make it easier to understand, because there have been calendar changes over the years, but that's basically it. So, where does it all come from, and what's the relationship with Judaism and Hasmonean Judaism? Well, it's to do with the end of the tithe year, which is something you'll see in the Bible. The Tekufat of Tevet is also relevant in observing certain commandments, such as setting aside a tithe, that is, a tenth of our wealth, as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 22 to 29, with which we are to celebrate a pilgrimage each year. But which pilgrimage are they talking about? It doesn't specify. Though never explicitly explained in the Bible, we see that various times of the year, other than the 7 biblical holy days, have also been appointed for this pilgrimage by various rulers. For example, Heshvan the 15th was appointed for this pilgrimage by the wicked Jeroboam, and Purim was appointed by the Babylonian Jews. But the Hasmoneans gave us Hanukkah. Hasmoneans were descendants of the Maccabees, and they gave us Hanukkah, which the Mishnah tells us was even appointed by a miracle, where the oil lasted for 8 nights and days. So the law on tithing is also clarified by the oral Torah concept of Tu B'Shvat. The Tu B'Shvat preparations began during Hanukkah. The idea behind using garlands for Hanukkah, as ordained in the book of Maccabees, by the way, even decorating a Hanukkah bush, which influenced the paradise tree, ancestor of modern-day Christmas trees, is related to the Hasmonean minhag of tying ribbons around the fruit on the boughs of various fruitful trees before Tu B'Shvat, to distinguish what we call Yashan fruit, that's old fruit, which belongs to one tithe year, from Chadash fruit, which is new fruit, which belongs to the next tithe year. This also helps us understand Leviticus chapter 23, verse 14 better. And to do this, an example of Talmudist righteousness is an example of Talmudist righteousness surpassing that of the Pharisees, because most people don't do this anymore. But it's an example to keeping distinction between Yashan v'Chadash is something which most Jews don't really care about these days. The Hasidic Jews do, but many, even Pharisees, sort of omit this, and so it's not necessary to do this outside the land of Israel if we don't own the land of Israel, and if the Messiah hasn't come. So a lot of things which you can do to allow your righteousness as a Talmudist to surpass that of the Pharisees is to do things which the Pharisees would say, oh, we don't have to do that until Messiah comes. In other words, we'd kind of drop that from Judaism. We don't do that anymore. But you can do it, and then you've got more righteousness, tzadikut, than the Pharisees. So it's important to do these things. So tying the ribbons on the boughs to distinguish the fruit which has already appeared on the bough from fruit which hasn't yet appeared on boughs was part of that. You would tie the ribbon around the boughs which have got fruit appearing on them, and that would be identified therefore as yashan fruit. You could eat that before the bringing your offering to the temple for the coming year for trees, because you have a distinction between the new year for trees, which begins on the 1st of Shavat, which is a winter holiday. So, furthermore, the Shammai Hillel debate over whether the new year for plants, new year for trees, begins on either the 1st of Shavat or the 15th of Shavat might have stemmed from being certain whether the solar tekufat of Tevet had passed or not. Because if it hadn't passed, then you couldn't get ready for the new year for trees. You had to pass the tekufat of Tevet before you could do so. Now, in Hillel's calendar, they were concerned that the 1st of Shavat was too close to the tekufat of Tevet, and therefore we should just put a fence around it, wait another 15 days, and then we'll be certain that the tekufat of Tevet had passed, and then we can have New Year for trees at that point. But Shammai was always much more strict about things and said, no, the 1st of Shavat is the tekufat of Tevet. We don't need to have a fence around it. I should remind you that the Shammai school is the school which executed Jesus of Nazareth, and it's the Hillel school which said, leave the disciples alone. If what they're doing is from God, then nothing can stop them. The Hillel school was always very cautious, and so that's why they were patient and more relaxed and laid back about what the disciples of Jesus were doing in the book of Acts than the Shammai school, which was always much more severe. But in some cases, the Shammai school seems to be much closer to the Torah than Hillel, because Hillel is cautious and merciful, whereas Shammai is strict and hardline. It was the Shammai school which Jesus' disciples were being brought from, and so Christianity has a lot in common with the Shammai school, because they were trying to tame the Shammai school, which was just it's too wicked, to be quite frank. It was too wicked, and in fact, we have a comment about the Shammai school in the Talmud, which says that the ordinances passed by the school of Shammai they have 18 ordinances by Shammai. Were the day that was passed was worse than, was more sinful than, more wicked than the sin of the golden calf. So we don't have a lot of sympathy for that. We recognize that the law of Shammai school is true; it is halacha. But we go with the school of Hillel instead, which is more merciful and more patient and more cautious. So look, be patient, time will tell. All right. So that debate between Shammai and Hillel on the 5th, whether the New Year for trees began on either the 1st or the 15th of Shavat, might have stemmed from being certain whether the solar tekufat of Tevet, that's the winter solstice, had passed or not. Shammai ruled that it should always be on the 1st of Shavat, even if the solar tekufat of Tevet had not passed, which sounds a bit crazy. And Hillel permitted it on the 15th of Shavat. Permitting it on the 15th of Shavat is not the same as ordaining it should be on the 15th of Shavat, but things get dumbed down as time goes by, and now it is basically observed on the 15th of Shavat instead. So here's an example. You might see that as basic Christmas tree decoration. You've got your sort of baubles representing fruits of the tree of life, actually, and the ribbons tied around the boughs, which are symbolizing, that actually comes from Hasmonean times. That's a Hasmonean tradition right there. All right. And it's Judaic in origin. If you want to have something Judaic on your Christmas tree, tie a ribbon around a bough just to sort of symbolize and tick the box, and thereby, have some kind of observance which is going beyond the Pharisees. All right. Furthermore, any calendar converter, and I've got on the website here, if you click on the link there, it actually takes you to a very good calendar converter, or it should take you to a very good calendar converter if the internet is working. And that is on 4 milab.ch, which has a great calendar converter here. You can convert between Gregorian calendar, the Julian date, modified Julian day, Julian calendar, Hebrew calendar, Islamic calendar, Persian calendar, the Mayan calendars. You've got the Indian civil calendar, the French Republic calendar. You've got all sorts of calendars on this, so you can go through to this calendar converter page if you want to mess around with things and find out. Just be aware, though, that the year 0, if I do the 1st of January in the year 0 on this, for example, in the Gregorian calendar, just be aware that the 1st of January year 0 on the Julian date is different. It's the year -1 or 1 BC, and that would be the 3rd of January in 1 BC. So don't confuse the dates with the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar and think they're the same. The Gregorian calendar, which we use today, has a year 0. But before 1592, when the Pope Gregory made his reform, before that date, there was no year 0. They had a year -1. If I put the next year up there, for example, if I go to make it very clear, I'll show you this. If I go to December the 31st, okay, in the year -1, and you can see the Hebrew date there. It's the 15th of Tevet, okay? And if I just up the day one more day, okay, to the 16th of Tevet down here and calculate it, watch what happens to the Julian calendar. One day later, 1st of January, right? It's going to be 1st of January, which year? 1, the year 1. There's no year 0 in the Julian calendar. It goes BC 1 and then AD 1, and there's no year 0. But in the Gregorian calendar, we do have a year 0. So anyway, you can play around with that as well. It's on the website if you want to have a go. So furthermore, any calendar converter will show that Shammai's New Year for plants or New Year for trees, the 1st of Shavat in Gregorian 1 BC, when Jupiter actually stood still over Bethlehem after its 9-month journey into Virgo, was December the 25th, according to the calendar celebration, corresponding to the calendar celebration, which follows on immediately after Tekufat Tevet. So here we go. This is a little screenshot of some software. It's taking a while to put, which is a retro calculation, and it shows the progress of the planet Jupiter day by day. Here we're looking at Gregorian 2 BC, which is Julian 1 BC, 25th of December at Gregorian 2 BC, and we have the movement of Jupiter going through Virgo, and it goes up to Regulus, turns around, comes back here again, hovers for a while, and goes back to on its journey. And that is called retrograde motion. And it's the only time where you can see a star. People, they're not stars, they're planets, but in the olden days, they used to call them stars. It's the only time when you can see a star stop in its motion. It moves forward and then it stops and hovers in one place for a while, for 3 days, and then continues. And that's the explanation for, the star of Bethlehem stopping over Bethlehem. The star was moving, and then it stopped over Bethlehem, and that actually was visible from Jerusalem. When you look due south from Jerusalem at that time, Jupiter appeared to stop moving over Bethlehem for 3 days and then carried on. And Jupiter, of course, is a king star. Regulus, of course, is also a king star. So there's some important things there. Some people disagree and say, no, that can't be. That's too pagan. We don't like the idea of having astronomy and astronomers picking signs from nature to dictate, to identify times and seasons. They say that's totally unbiblical, when in fact that is actually totally biblical. That's what it says in the first book of Genesis. But some people really feel uncomfortable about that. They don't like the idea of God appointing times and seasons using stars and positions of the stars, positions of planets and positions of the moon, etc., moon phases. They don't like that. They're very uncomfortable about that. And so they have an alternative suggestion, that it was just an angelic star which just moved and led in a particular direction. I think that's also okay, as long as we accept and understand that this kind of angelic view of things, in our modern world, we've got to, kind of wake up and look around us. We're living in the space age, people. So we're talking about angels, visitors from the heavens coming down and guiding us and giving us signs. And in the modern day, modern language, we better just call that as it's known by most young people. Otherwise, we just alienate them. They say, what are you talking about? That would be basically alien spacecraft coming down. And they had songs about that, in the 1970s. A spaceman came traveling in a ship from afar. 'Twas light years of time since his mission did start. And over a stable he halted his craft. And it hung in the sky like a star, just like a star. You might know this Christmas song, but there are a few of them which are basically the idea when the space age began that, hey, maybe the angels were aliens. And I think that that's an acceptable position. Of course, you will find the dark side trying to make you afraid of aliens, afraid of visitors from the heavens, and saying anybody who comes down here from heaven is a fallen angel, completely ignoring the fact that we human species ourselves are the race of fallen angels, fallen aliens, fallen angels, and it's us who are the ones we have to be afraid of, who are trying to trap us here. We cannot escape this planet and get back to where we come from until we transform ourselves, because flesh and blood does not inherit the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so there's different ways of interpreting that, but the point of the matter is that this also happened, and it corresponded to the Tukufat of Tevet. In fact, it corresponded to the first of Shavat, the New Year for trees, and so that's why we hear references to Christmas as the New Year, Edom's New Year, or Shammai's New Year for plants. It means the New Year for trees, the first of Shavat. Okay, so Adam and Eve's feast day, something else you maybe didn't know, but evidently the early Messianic Noahides were inspired by all of this Mishnah, this Judaism that we're just looking at, this Hasmonean Judaism, to decorate their paradise trees, which came from decorating the idea of a Hanukkah bush, with ribbons and Kabbalic spheres for the pivotal Tikufat of Tevet just before the first of Shavat, and established this time, the Tikufat of Tevet, between Adam Kadmon's feasts, which is Hanukkah on a calendar, as the saints' day for Adam and Eve. Did you know that? It's December the 24th day. That is, according to the original early traditional churches, the feast day, or the saints' day, the day memorial day for Adam and Eve, which concludes the calendar. It concludes tonight with the calendar proclamation of midnight mass, starting the octave of calendar celebrations from December the 25th to January the 1st. And here we have another example of a Christmas tree decoration. But in fact, what we see here with these ribbons on the tree and these little spheres, little baubles, is all Kabbalah. This is Keter and Chochmah Bina. Dath is not there. Then you have Gevra and Chesed, Tiferet, Hod, Netzach, Yesod, and Malkut. So this is all Judaism, all Hasmonean Judaism. And that's Yolka Kabbalah there for you to have a look. So Tekufat Tevet marks the pivotal, darkest northern time of the year between Hanukkah and calendar. That's the key point. The winter solstice is that time, which we just had. And it's an evil night to give birth. Okay? An evil night to birth. All right, so among Eastern Yiddish speakers, the longest night of this darkest time of the year, Tekufat Tevet, goes by a variety of different names, such as Finstere Nacht, which means starless night, or Moidrige Nacht, which means murderous night, and Blinde Nacht, or blind night, because it's so dark. In total, there are more than a dozen terms that Yiddish speakers have used to name the time of transition between Hanukkah and calendar, according to the Language and Culture Atlas of Ashkenazi Jewry. But by far the most common Yiddish term for December the 24th today, Tekufat Tevet, is Nittelnacht. Well, that was last night, which is not only the most frequent and widespread, but which also contains the only official scholarly Yiddish term for explains that the Yiddish word nittel is derived from the medieval Latin natalis, meaning birth, related to the English word natal, as in antenatal clinic and postnatal clinic. As in the Latin name of the December 25th holiday, Natalis Deus Domini, the Lord's birth, which also gave the Italian and Indonesian terms of Christmas being Natale and Natal. And also the word Natalie, as in Natalie Portman, a very famous Jewish actress, is named after the same holiday, Natalie Portman. So in case you didn't realize, it is Jewish. A little example of a Jewish nativity there with a sort of Hasidic or Pharisee Joseph and Mary and a little baby Jesus with a star. Okay, so the earliest The second reference is a work called Hanitzachon, which dates back to the generation of the Rosh, 1250s to 1327, where it also states that Nittel refers to the birth of Jesus, although Nittel is actually more commonly associated in Judaic tradition with the birth Hatzadik. But more about that later. You'll learn more about that later. He's very important for the origins of the New Testament. Unlike the term Nittelnacht, most other Yiddish words for this pivotal night of the year reflect language distinctive to a particular region. For example, with characteristic precision, the Litvak Pharisees distinguished December the 24th as Vigilia, Vigil. That's today, is the Vigilia, until midnight, which is followed after midnight by Kaleid, being the closest to the original Roman terms Vigilia and Kalenda. Some less than Talmudic examples included Rizlech in Ukraine, which is supposed to be from the Ukrainian word Rizdvo, Yolkus in Belarusian, which is from Belarusian Yolka for a Christmas tree, Rojdestvo in the Balkans, which is from the Bulgarian Rojdestvo Christovo, Korachon in Hungary, from the Hungarian Karachoni, and Krichun in Transylvania, from the same, actually, Hungarian origin word, which is now in modern Romanian. Very interesting and complex Kabbalic concept, whereby essentially when you diminish something, you actually are deifying it. Pay attention to this now, it's very interesting. So other Yiddish terms for the Tekufat of Tevet are more subversively playful inventions, largely expressive of Jewish fears associated with this time. Goyim Nacht, Nationalists' Night, is self-explanatory, while Weihnacht, literally Woe Night, which is common among Jews in Alsace and Galicia and Western Poland, is a pun on Weihnachten, the German term for December the 24th. Then you have Beis Gebäudenischt, which literally means swell birthing, but also means evil birthing. As I said, it's an evil time to give birth. And it plays on the Polish word Boże Narodzenie and is related to the phrase Nittel is a swell load. Well, as I said, this word Beis has got kind of a pun meaning to it. Then you've got Kratzmach, literally scratch me, is a pun on Christmas among certain Erev Rav Grinches in America. And finally, of course, there is Xmas, which has become widely used. Indeed, many among the Erev Rav have thought and encouraged enemies of Judaism to think that the core purpose of being Jewish has only ever been to hate a certain historical Jew. In fact, to listen to such people, one would think that Judaism offers nothing else besides that. In their ignorance, such people think that they are making someone or something into nothing without really realizing that the belima they achieve for Jesus or Christmas by their negativity is actually equivalent to identifying him or it as Hashem, according to the Kabbalah. And if you want more information about that, you can read the Jewish commentaries on Job, chapter 26, verse 7, and Isaiah, chapter 49, verse 7, and chapter 53, verse 3. There's a lot been written about Belima here. So, it is a lose-lose situation for haters. For according to Yehuda HaHasid in the Sefer Hasidim, Siman 191, although we must change the name of a Jewish tzaddik who is worshipped as a patron by Christians, at the same time, we must not consider debasing any form of idolatry, what we perceived to be idolatry. Remember, shituf is permitted to Noahides, nor urinating on it or excreting on it, because that is what was done to Peor. And that is in the Sefer Hasidim manuscript Palmer H, 3280, caption 1348. Now, what happened with Peor, of course, it led to a heresy, which is regarded as the only heresy which has ever really destroyed Israel, because it was something which led to the Israelites themselves adopting these practices and being destroyed from the inside. So we do not consider debasing idolatry, because by debasing it, we end up deifying it. We make it have power over Israel. This is actually the concept of belima. So when you hear people who are Jews who are making fun of Christmas or making fun of Jesus, just remember belima, okay? Thus, Christmas is only mocked or belittled among either the most ignorant Jews or among secret Jews for Jesus who understand the Kabbalah of belima very, very well. For example, if you hear them referring to Jesus as Yoshka, which sounds a bit over familiar and maybe disrespectful, you can think to yourself, well, either this person is a secret Jew for Jesus, is calling him Yoshka because he's doing a bit of belima and deifying him here, raising him to the level of Hashem, and identifying him as Hashem, or he's just a totally ignorant Jew who doesn't understand that that's what he's doing. Okay, so that's the concept of belima. And you can read more about belima here. There's a link there on the website you can click on and go to read about that. So then other traditions besides Hanukkah, Adam's fast. Adam appointed this fasting period, remember? Belima, calendar, and tithing. There are also several other matters associated with the Tekufat of Tevet itself in Talmudic tradition, concerning which all serious Talmudim are required to be familiar. So, first, the Tekufat of Tevet is associated with tragedy. For example, although the Hanukkah miracle clearly happened in a year when the Tekufat of Tevet was after the end of the second of Tevet, since the second of Tevet is the last day of Hanukkah, the tragedies of the 9th of Tevet, which is the murder of Rav Shimon Klopas HaTzadik, and the 10th of Tevet, which is the breach of Jerusalem, in different years were also associated with the same time, the same darkest time of the year in North Turanian Hemisphere. So these dates are all associated with this negative time of the year. Furthermore, the dark powers of this darkest northern time of the year had also affected, according to Judaism, Jephthah, as the day he sacrificed his daughter. And we read that in Abdul Raham's Shahar HaTakufot, page 122a in the Venice manuscript 1566. You might think, Abdul Raham, what kind of name is that? Isn't that a Muslim name? I have to remind you all that there's a lot of Judaism we get from Judeo-Arabic texts, and we have to study Judeo-Arabic texts in order to understand them. So these are written in Arabic, a Judaic form of Arabic, by Jews who were Arabic-speaking Jews. So the evil of Tekufat Tevet was also manifest yet again in the sin of Yossel Pondrek. That's Joseph Pandera on that particular night. And there's a picture of Jephthah here sacrificing his daughter on the Tekufat of Tevet. So celibacy, the Yossel Pondrek sin is associated with sexual activity. So celibacy therefore became an important thing. Hence, we also find that concerning the 9th of Tevet, although tied to Tekufat season and the murder of Rab Simeon Klopas HaTzadik and things like the breaching of Jerusalem and Jephthah's sin, it had at least once been misunderstood as due to the fact that Otto Aish, in this case a reference to Ben Stada, was conceived on that night. That's last night. According to the Hakahot of Tosafot Yeshanim, in the name of Gadol Echad, brought in the Tosafot of some editions of the Shulchan Aruch in chapter 580, in the Machan Yeshuraim Friedman edition, though removed from regular editions due to the error. Indeed, Ben Stada was conceived on the Tekufat of Tevet, but not necessarily on the 9th of Tevet. He was conceived on the Tekufat of Tevet, but not necessarily on the 9th. Although Tekufat of Tevet stays still and the month dates move around because they are lunar dates, lunar months, they move around, and so you get different dates occurring on the Tekufat of Tevet different years. And yes, he was conceived on the Tekufat of Tevet, but not the 9th. Thus, another Yiddish term for the Tekufat of Tevet is Joiselsnacht, night of Joseph. And that's not me, that's Yossel Pondrek, the rapist father of Ben Stada, in reference to Yossel Pondrek's sin, i.e. to the conception of Ben Stada, the Yiddish version of Krampus. The latter's mother, that is Ben Stada's mother, Mary Magdalene, was supposed to have been raped by the Romanized reveler Yossel Pondrek, Pandera, on the Tekufat of Tevet, implying Ben Stada's birth almost 9 months later in 29 or 32 CE on Yom Kippur, as promoted by many Notzrim. So the movie we watched last night, we watch movies and eat lots of sort of garlicky foods like Chinese foods and things like that. These are traditions we do for Tevet, for Joselsnacht, for Nittelnacht. And so last night, the movie we watched was, for the family, was the Da Vinci Code, which is very, very relevant to the whole story because they actually do talk about Magdalena as children in there, but they confuse Joseph with Jesus. And that's really the only mistake in that movie. But there is a cult, there is a sect out there who do follow the descendants. Everything else was really pretty much close. They are the royal bloods who are supposed to be descended from Magdalena's son. But they got it wrong. It's not Jesus who was the father. It wasn't Jesus who impregnated Mary Magdalene. It was Joseph who impregnated Mary Magdalene. Now, Joseph Pandora is mentioned in the Bible as one of the so-called brothers of Jesus. They say, oh, well, he's beside himself. His mother and his brothers are outside. And it talks about Joseph as one of his brothers. Joseph Pandora is Yossel Pondrik, the one who impregnated Mary Magdalene, actually raped her. She was supposed to be engaged to Yochanan Av Papos, but instead he came in disguised as Av Papos under the dark of night, darkest time of the year, in the darkest night of the year, longest night of the year, and pretended to be Yochanan and raped her. And she only found out about this in the morning, and that was what caused her husband Yehuda Av Papos to leave her. And then she found forgiveness with Jesus of Nazareth, her teacher, and she named her son Jesus after her teacher. But the father was not Jesus. The father was Joseph. That is the Jewish tradition. Yossel Pondrik. Some people, even in Judaism, Yossel is absolutely 100%. Yossel is 100% an abbreviation for Yossi. Yossel. That's my name. Okay, it's absolutely impossible to be abbreviation for any other name. But because of the influence of these people who believe that Mary Magdalene's husband was Jesus rather than Joseph, they have even come into Judaism and they're trying to change the meaning of the name Yossel, which is short, a diminutive form of the name Yossi, Joseph. They try to turn that into an abbreviative form of Jesus, of Yeshua, which doesn't make any sense. It's just not linguistically possible to be. But this is because things are changing as time goes by. We have too many converts from these strange Christian sects bringing their ideas into Judaism and trying to revive the sect of Joseph Pandora and his son Ben Stada in Judaism. And so as a result, you find people sometimes saying that Yossel or Yossel is actually an abbreviation of Jesus. It's not. It's an abbreviation of Joseph. Please do correct them if you come upon them. Say, how do you know? Because Yossi told me. Because Yossel told me. All right, then. So that was the time that Mary Magdalene was raped by the Romanized reveler Yossel Pondrik on the Tukufat of Tevet, implying Ben Stada's birth almost 9 months later in 29 or 32 CE, roughly, on Yom Kippur, as promoted by many Notzrim. Many Notzrim will say that today. You know they're Notzrim. And, the word Notzrim is used in modern Hebrew to refer to Christians, but I use it here in the correct biblical sense of the word, those who secretly did things against the Lord. Wicked people who do the opposite of what's supposed to be done. And many Notzrim do still try to claim that Jesus was born on Yom Kippur. If you find people saying that, you know that they belong to this sect of Yossel Pondrik. Thus, it came to be believed that children conceived on Yosselsnacht can easily be spiritually corrupted, as was Ben Stada. So a tradition of celibacy on this night emerged. Keep away from sexual relations on this night, we say, because if you accidentally impregnate your wife on this night, then you will end up possibly having a child as wicked as Ben Stada, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Jesus, remember, when he grew up and he tried to get control of the Christian movement, and he was very successful for a while in doing so, but was defeated by the Sanhedrin and the sages of the Sanhedrin. And that led to the creation of the New Testament by the Sanhedrin in order to fight against the influence of Ben Stadler's corruption in Christian faith. But Ben Stadler's essentially the incarnation of evil, and his work, his fighting against the message of the universal message, universal Judaism, because Judaism has got a message for Jews, but it's also universal Judaism for all Noahides, for all people on the planet. And Ben Stadler's work basically tries to destroy that. That there's a two-tier system in Judaism, always has been, and we have to try and keep that truth going out there, despite the efforts of the dark side trying to corrupt and suppress this truth. So it was also therefore to keep away from anything like alcohol, which might lead to sexual relations on that night, since any child conceived during the Tekufat of Tevet was sure to be cursed and grow up to be a tool of the evil inclination. An example of the rape of Mary Magdalene going on there by Yossel Pondrik. But it wouldn't be really looking like that. Okay, so post, I would say AD persecutions, CE persecutions, Christian era persecutions. Concern over the potency of winter's darkness had also passed from Jews into Messianic Noahide tradition, both in direct contrast to the drunken debauchery of the Romans and other pagans. From late antiquity, the Tekufat of Tevet was a time when such maleficent forces made even the prayer houses of the Judaic believers, both Jew and Noahide alike, into special targets for persecution by Romans during Saturnalia. Saturnalia is the pagan response to what used to be Adam and Eve's fasting around the Tekufat of Tevet. Hence, the Talmudic prohibition against eulogizing during Hanukkah, and the Hasidic saying that dogs, a symbol of Rome and Esau, appear to those who study in the Beit Midrash on this night. Yosel's sin encapsulates a memory of the effects of Roman imperialism suffered not only among Jews, but also by early Messianic Noahides, and which continued even after Rome's official conversion, so-called conversion. Christians who did not toe the imperial line continued to be persecuted as heretics, together with Jews now accused of deicide, for roughly another 1,260 years. That's history, folks. Finally, although Luther and Calvin's attitude were far from conciliatory to Jews, the Reformation brought on an appreciation for Hebraic ideas among Anabaptists, at least, as increasing numbers of Christians rose up against various heavy-handed Roman-like authorities, including those run by Lutherans and Calvinists. And although Poland's official stance was tolerance at that time, in Cossack areas things got so bad for Jews on December the 24th, that's last night and today, until tonight, that a Russian Jewish saying emerged that if one sticks a knife into the earth on December 24th, blood will pour out because of the violence associated with that night. Closing the synagogues and staying home on Tekufat Tevet amid rowdy anti-Semites was a reasonable response to such terror. So that's where a tradition came from, staying home. We had a visitor come last night, and we heard the knocking. Thought, nobody ever comes on visits on this night. And there was a shadow through the window and the door. I thought, oh dear. It was our friend dropping off some presents for the children, but not a Jewish friend, a Gentile friend. And we explained, sorry for the delay. It's not a good night to open the door to people. We stay indoors. That's just a tradition as things went by for a long, long time. Okay. So the persecution continued throughout the Christian era. And celibacy is one of the traditions, and fasting is another tradition. So these things continued even after Rome supposedly converted. All right, fasting. As a result, one who still remembers Adam's fast for Tekufat Tevet is considered to have fasted for all such tragedies ever since. So if you fast on this day, which, by the way, some Christians still do, they still fast until the sun sets today on Christmas Eve. They'll fast until the sun sets, and then they'll start eating. Fasting for the Tekufat Tevet, if you do so, it's considered as if you have fasted for all of the tragedies we've talked about today in this little show. Until very recently, Christians also opposed the pagan Roman corruption of Adam's monotheistic celebration and turned it into Saturnalia, those Romans who turned it into Saturnalian drunken debauchery. And the Christians who opposed that did so by acknowledging Adam's winter fast, and they still do. If there are any Messianic Noahides out there, they still do fast on this day, as opposed to the drunken debauchery, until, of course, sunset. The earliest Messianic Noahides used to observe the whole period up to the Shepherd's Candle of Joy as a fast, which, as sects of Christianity and Islam evolved from them, became respectively the Advent Nativity Fast and Ramadan, at least Ramadan before the invention of the Islamic calendar messed up the timing. If you want to see the original timing of how the Muslim calendar was before it was messed up, you have to get a copy of Fazlur Rahman Sheikh's book, The Chronology of Prophetic Events, and the appendix at the back there, he shows you the dates that Ramadan occurs until the calendar was changed, which was several years after, allegedly several years after the founder of Islam had passed away. It could have been changed 100 years after, but was backdated to that particular year. Nevertheless, the founder of Islam certainly observed Ramadan as a nativity fast or an Advent fast every year of his entire life. So if you want to be a real follower of that person, you should also join in the nativity fast. But that's finished now, so you have to wait until next year. So mark it in your diaries if you are Muslims and you want to do the right thing. So it's the nativity fast is what we're talking about. So the time before the Tukufat of Tevet was associated with Adam's fast as a precursor to Saturnalia. And although a fast during Tevet was observed among first century Romanian Jews, that is in the Hasmonean Minhag, like Jesus of Nazareth himself, as mentioned in the beginning of Gospel of Luke chapter 4, it didn't survive in the Babylonian sects. That fasting period didn't survive in the Babylonian sects. This is because the Babylonian sect prohibited fasting during Hanukkah, which from 1582 overlapped Saturnalia and soon eclipsed the memory of the earlier Tekufat Tevet fast of Adam and Eve, which was only preserved in Jerusalem Minhag and mostly among Messianic Noahides. Instead, a new form of abstinence associated with Tekufat of Tevet emerged among Jews, regardless of whether it was Hanukkah or even a Sabbath. And that new form of abstinence we call Bittul Torah. So Bittul Torah means abstinence from Torah. So you're not going to be able to fast because rabbinic tradition mandates. So we could actually abstain from Torah study, which rabbinic tradition tells us we should do in times of tragedy. In Judaism, we have lots of puns. It loves puns. Judaism loves puns, and yet another pun for nittel plays on the Yiddish term nit, meaning nothing, in reference to the practice of Bittul Torah, ceasing Torah study on December the 24th. Jews usually study Torah almost every night, which is believed to strengthen creation. But the dark history of tragedies on the Tekufat of Tevet led to the belief that even religious sparks generated by Torah study to nourish the universe may actually be feeding the elemental force of winter darkness itself at this time. Think about it. What are the seasons famous for? Summer is famous for abundance of produce, lots of fresh fruits and vegetables off the trees. It's abundance, sort of ripening time, summer harvest time. So if we study Torah, we're supposed to strengthen the elemental force of summer, so there'll be even more of that. Okay, think about springtime. In springtime, we have the new lambs being born in the fields. We've got the first fruits starting to appear on the trees, the first sort of sprouts of things, spring greens, they call them. And if we do Torah study, we will strengthen and increase the power of spring and the abundance of such new life and first fruits and spring greens, and the lambs will be more because we're studying Torah, and it feeds and strengthens the season. And again, in autumn time, you've got the final harvest. You've got apples and pears. You've got pumpkins and squashes and all sorts of fruits from the earth, the final harvest. And if we are studying Torah, we're going to strengthen the elemental force of autumn, and that's going to produce more of that. And likewise, so in winter, what is winter famous for? It's got horrible weather, snow, blizzards, ice, cold. if you then study Torah at that time, then you're going to strengthen and increase the blizzards and the ice and the cold. You see? So the idea came, look, perhaps all of these tragedies are happening on the Tukufat of Tevet, on the winter solstice, because we're studying Torah. And perhaps we need to stop studying Torah in order to weaken the force of winter, so that winter is not as strong as it used to be. So that's where the idea comes from, Bittul Torah. Okay, so I'll recap that. So the idea is that the universe may actually, Torah study, nourishing the universe, may actually be feeding the elemental force of winter darkness at this time. So, in an effort to spiritually reduce the power of winter, many Jews began to abstain from Torah study at Tekufat Tevet. The power of winter is so strong on December 24th that if you study Torah on the eve before midnight, that's last night, because remember, Jews follow everything from the night before, right? Its power would be stolen by the other side. But without Torah learning, it's believed there is less power in the elemental forces of the universe. Hence, Bittul Torah, usually an act of mourning, was a mystical calculus to weaken the Tekufat of Tevet. This also led to yet another pun from Nittel. It's a different spelling, Nittel. Nital, meaning for the Torah was removed, Nital, from the world at this time. Also suggesting the removal of the Notzrim, who secretly did things against the Lord, and according to 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 9, by the triumph of Rabbi St. Simeon Kalpus's Evangelion. There's another aspect which is very important, but we'll get into it much later. Furthermore, Nittel, rhyming with Bittel, is often taught as an acronym for Nicht Torah Lernen, in reference to the hiatus on Torah study, or the Tekufat of Tevet. Now, apostates, Jews who converted to Christianity, and by apostate Christianity we're referring to specifically Roman Christianity, Calvinism, Lutheranism, because Anabaptist converts are still people who have left Judaism, but are they even apostate? They may have become Noahides instead, but if you are, it's not good, if you're a Jew, you become a Noahide. It's not good. You're kind of losing your birthright, but that means you're following the path of Esau, Edom, who also gave up his birthright, but can be saved. And so we would say that the head which can be saved, the head of Esau, are the Anabaptists, and the other Christians are the body of Esau that gets picked to pieces by the beast of the field. But they become the bones, and the bones can also be brought into a burial place in Israel and get a place in the world to come too. And that's what this channel is for, to give the armies of Gog and Magog, give them a burial place in Israel. We try to do that to the bones which are left after Christianity has been picked to pieces. So apostates really refers to that kind of Jew. Jews who converted to Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Roman Christianity. In the 16th century, are known to have mentioned the practice of Bittul Torah, for Nittel, in their anti-Jewish polemics, which in and of itself indicates that they did not know about it. The requisite conclusion is that even if the apostates were from extremely irreligious backgrounds, the Bittul Torah was not universally popular at that time. So although it makes sense, Bittul Torah, okay, let's weaken winter. Although it makes sense, we don't have any evidence that Bittul Torah was being practiced at this time until after Pope Gregory's calendar reform in 1582, 1592? Oh, I'll have to try and find that now, just to remind myself. Was it 82? 1582 calendar, yeah, there it is, the 1582 calendar reform. Okay, so really it was after this calendar reform that we start hearing about Bittul Torah. Okay, so apostates who are Jews who converted to Christianity in the 16th century are known to have mentioned the practice of Bittul Torah for Nittel. Are not known to have mentioned the practice of Bittul Torah for Nittel in their anti-Jewish polemics, and they wrote some very nasty ones, which in and of itself indicates that they did not know about it. The requisite conclusion is that even if the apostates were from extremely irreligious backgrounds, the Bittul Torah was not universally popular at that time. The earliest reference to Bittul Torah is from the second half of the 17th century in Kitzur Halachot, a text by Rabbi Yair Chaim Bachrach, and it's called Mekor Hayim. There we have the first known reference to the practice in rabbinic writings, being a single line in the index of Rabbi Yair Bachra's book, where it says, and the practice of cancelling Torah study on Christmas. Sadly, what he actually wrote about it has been lost. That's all we have, just a scrap left. In Jewish circles, refraining from Torah study at the madrasas on Nittel became popular as a way of avoiding unwanted attention and reducing the chances of inviting violence against them. In a metaphorical sense, at least, Bittul Torah had been proven to limit the strength of those who sought to hurt Jewish lives. Besides Nittel night was when the Hitzonim, those are impurities, they're kind of demons, when Hitzonim, or they could be ghosts as well, of wicked people, reign supreme, and therefore Torah study, the most sacred of activities, would not be appropriate on such a night. To practice Bittul Torah, some would go to sleep in the early evening, while others stayed awake, fearing that they might dream about Torah study, allegedly. Such rabbis would probably have preferred visions of sugar plums dancing in their heads, but the real reason why we stay awake is not that. Bittul Torah at Christmas was not generally practiced by Litvak Pharisees, that's us, but so as to not worry Jews who did observe Bittul Torah, most Pharisees did not sleep on natal night until after lighting a candle at midnight for a little Torah study before going to bed. And so what Torah study did we do? Well, we would study a baraita. We're going to get into it a little bit later. After all, it would reflect badly in heaven for Jews to sleep soundly through the night while the Gentiles were up in their places of worship praying to God. So which baraita? We'll get there. The Litvak Pharisee practice of lighting a candle at midnight for a Torah study session soon spread, whereby even some whose tradition was to sleep would arise at midnight and light a candle for a little Torah study. In some communities, the custom was to either study Torah in one's mind, or, since, as the sages teach us, one's personal familiarity with Torah content does not in and of itself defines one's religiosity, rather one's actions and emotions are the significant part of one's religious life. While we refrain from Torah learning, one could invest in other religious practices, namely acts of loving kindness and charity. So there is more than one way to study Torah. One is by physically engaging in acts of loving kindness, chesed and charity. Another is to recite a story in your mind or to talk about it without opening a book. And other is to light the candle at midnight and then do a little Torah study. But there is a particular baraita which we would study on this night, and that baraita is called the Toleh. That's the thing which we would use to remind us of what's this night, how this night culminated, with specifically the story of Yosel's son Ben Stada and Rabbi Shimon HaKalpus's creation of the New Testament. So that's the baraita we study, but we don't use books to do it. So we do it from memory, or we would do it with card games, using trump cards. Now, an Israeli problem. We've got to address this issue. I mentioned at the beginning of the show. These days, only Noahides celebrate calendar, and Nittel Nacht has been observed less often among many Jews, especially Israelis, who remain now following the Holocaust. As Sharbach writes, modern practitioners have found, this is in Israel, have found the Nittel Nacht observances increasingly irksome and meaningless, leading to the phrase, Nittel is a Bezalaid, though many continue to observe them for the sake of tradition. As a result, Israelis who are ignorant of the Pharisee testimony have suggested abandoning or limiting Nittel observances, at least in the land of Israel. For example, Gavriel Zinner of Borough Park pretends that Nittel Nacht customs were not established to be observed in the land of Israel. But the founder of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl, would disagree, as in fact also does Avodah Zarah 2, Part A, colon 1. It is a strange world indeed when we have to uphold a secular Jew like Herzl as more Jewish than the so-called modern Orthodox like Zinner. Inside the land of Israel, according to the Avodah Zarah, precautions require attention for 3 days in order for the holiness of the land of Israel to overcome the mystical concerns related to the superstition and impurity, hitzonim, surrounding Notzri festivities, as Meir HaKohen, the 13th century Germany, clarifies in his Meditations on the Ramadan Laws of Idolatry. It says, outside the land of Israel, we are only forbidden on the day itself. And it goes on that Rashbam commentates in the name of Rashi that this prohibition only refers to Nittel and Ketzach, which is quartodecimanism, that are only celebrated because of a baraita called the Talui. So there we go. That's the baraita we talk about and study. Revisionists, however, like Zinner, are equally gravenly mistaken in thinking that Christianity had never been a dominant force in the Holy Land, as they say, which any serious historian on the area knows was dominated by Byzantine Christianity from the 4th century to the 7th century, and again during the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, as well as under the British occupation after the Battle of Armageddon in the early 1900s. Furthermore, in ultra-Orthodox communities, at least one can become quite ostracized for suggesting that we should dismiss Nittel observance. As to whether Tikufot Tevet restrictions should be observed on Erev Shabbat or before, during Hanukkah, since 1582 made this possible, the majority opinion is currently that Nittel tradition must always be observed on the local December 24th, whether that's the Gregorian calendar or the Julian calendar, wherever you live, whatever calendar is in place, regardless of whether Nittelnacht is an Erev Rav, whether Nittelnacht is an Erev Shabbat, an eve of Sabbath, or falls before or during Hanukkah. This reflects Jewish anxiety regarding the Roman majority who could unleash murderous pogroms at a moment's notice. So, Bittul Torah was observed as our fasting tradition, even if physical fasting couldn't be observed at such times. Since the 1582, different Jewish communities have different times of when they observe Nittel, with the dates being either December 25th or January the 5th, depending on where one comes from. Among the stricter Haredim, it was both, December 25th being Nittel Katan, but January the 5th being Nittel Gadol. Nittel Nacht is observed the day before Nittel Katan, that is the 24th. So you've got 3 sort of days that you observe it, Nittel Nacht, Nittel Katan, and Nittel Gadol. Now, garlic. And I am definitely smelling of garlic today since we've been eating a ton of garlic last night, so you're very lucky we're doing this through the internet. The custom to eat garlic on Nittel, and I'm going to be eating more garlic today too, is ascribed to the atropaic properties of the herb. As Rabbi Isaac Weiss, whose life was 1873 to 1942, explains, for instance, the custom of the ancient ones to eat bread with garlic on the night of darkness, there's a blinde Nacht, is a means of ensuring that the impure forces, that is hahitzonim, do not attach themselves to you on that night. For to stand, metaphorically naked and barefoot without the protection of Torah and mitzvot on the night of darkness is akin to entering a graveyard unprotected against the hitzonim that reign there. One thus requires additional protection and guarding against the hitzonim on that night, such as the protection provided by the scent of garlic, which chases hitzonim away. In other words, if you don't have the protection of Torah, you have the protection of the next best thing, garlic. And that's actually reality. That is Judaism. Really, that is our tradition. Solomon Zvi Hirsch of Aufhausen confirms that Jews ate garlic on December the 24th and goes to some lengths to explain and defend the practice. In Der Jüdische Theriak of 1516, Hirsch acknowledges that the Jews eat garlic on the holiday of the Christians, but makes an effort to prove that the injunction to eat garlic predates the rise of Christianity, citing several proof texts from the Hebrew Bible. While not denying that Jews chose to eat garlic specifically on the December 24th, he maintains that practical consideration alone led Jews to take advantage of that day when Christians won't trade with Jews, so that they might imitate the eternal practice of our forefathers without fear of losing business to the garlic's wafting odor, which, at least among Jews, also helps ensure celibacy on the darkest night. For Jews, Garlic keeps the spirit of Yoisel Pondrik away in much the same way as it might deter vampires on Halloween for Christians. So there you go. The magic of Christmas. Hasidic Jews see the Tekufat of Tevet as a powerful time, a night in which magic reigns, the total acceptance and blind belief in the powers of the Tekufat Tevet, a weird and almost only adoption of the first the Julian and after 1582, then also the Gregorian calendars as having a real magical significance. One can even be quite ostracized, as I mentioned earlier, for suggesting that we ought to really disregard Ben Stada completely and best just ignore the many rules and regulations tied to the Tekufat of Tevet and Nittelnacht. On the contrary, one must go out of the way to pay so much attention to the day Ben Stada was sired, even deny ourselves access to something that gives Jews our entire existence meaning and purpose in life, that is, the Torah. Outside of Israel, the Nittel mitzvot have always been observed from sunset, or 6 p.m., to midnight on Nittelnacht, or from noon to midnight before Nittel Hagadol. They must be concluded by midnight, when begins Adam Kadmon's post-solstice celebration, which became the calendar Eid, as it's referred to in the Talmud, and are typically portrayed by practitioners as a form of supernatural defense. Sorry for so many errors in reading today. My eyes are still a bit blurry from a late night last night. Okay, so in Judeo-Christian culture, perhaps as a result of Jewish conversions to Christianity or increased Christian interest in Hebraism, after the Reformation, the darkest night before calendar proclamation was already popularly thought of as a time of heightened supernaturalism. It was a time when the damned, that is, the Hitzonim, walked the earth as ghosts, witches, and even werewolves. To discourage such uncanny troops of the damned, it was even best for Christian faithful to also eat a lot of garlic to avoid sacred activities while creating spaces that belong unambiguously to the living, spaces filled to bursting with waking bodies, light, noise, and celebrations with family and friends, singing, dancing, playing games, all to avoid a visitation from the dead, staying up until the calendar candle is lit for midnight devotions, or midnight mass as it came in the Christian world. In the United Kingdom, at least, Jews and Christians alike clearly shared the same anxieties which Charles Dickens played on very effectively in his Christmas Carol. To be alone, like Scrooge, was to invite a haunting, while songful, fun get-togethers and lights were expected to repel Hitzonim, that is, the evil spirits which prey on the lonesome. Dickens also includes reference to waking for the midnight candle, which he portrayed as a very Christkind-like spirit, as well as to a haunting before midnight from among the legions of the Hitzonim, the impure forces. The difference from the army of evil spirits symbolized by Dickens in Marley and his cohort, that Christians believed walked the earth on December 24th, was that for the Jews, it was of born Jews who had turned to sorcery, most notably the archetypal Jewish Krampus, Ben Stada, and the spirit that had possessed his rapist father, Yossel Pondrik, Joseph Panderer, which flies around from sunset to midnight on December 24th. That is last night, actually, because it's the Jewish way of counting days, not the Western way of counting days. Krampus. So now Krampus, has become part of German tradition as well. As I said, a lot of Anabaptists were interested in the Hebraic sources, and the ideas sort of emerged and passed on into Germanic tradition. So we have this Krampus-type figure who appears in many Germanic traditions across Europe, and also other places were influenced by this idea of the Hitzonim. Although, as already mentioned, the term nittel clearly exists in halakhic sources for several centuries, some of the customs associated with it are not spelled out until much later. For example, while we find references to nittel in rabbinic literature throughout the Middle Ages, the first mentions of the tradition of Bittul Torah on Nittelnacht comes in the early 17th century, only 32 years after the calendar reform, from an apostate called Samuel Friedrich Brentz in 1614, who said that our Jewish Krampus usually spends the night crawling through sewage, but that if he hears the Torah being studied in the house, he may gain temporary release from this prison. That is how Onkelos met him. Indeed, there are several variations on this Jewish folk belief that our Jewish Krampus returns to Earth on December 24th, last night. Some descriptions draw attention to the corporeal nature of the visiting Ben Stade in the most marked and grotesque terms. You may come across such if you start studying Yiddish literature. In parallel to how Krampus in Christian tradition comes to check whether children can say their prayers correctly, a visitation from the Jewish Krampus, Ben Stade, is also connected to our religious activity. But Pharisees do not fear such a visitation as Hasidim do. Hasidim are very, very serious about that. For us, it's a joke, but for them, it's a very real thing. If one is incautious enough to study Torah on that night, whenever our sewer Krampus, Ben Stade, comes across an open holy book, he will stick to the holy book and thereby defile it with sewage. Thus, often far from being a metaphorical representation or mystical abstraction, the Jewish Krampus described in these sources exhibits distinctly Jewish emotions and motivations. Ubiquitously conflated with Jesus of Nazareth, who was born at this time, as opposed to being sired at this time, one informant explains that Ben Stade, who was sired at this time, may appear and demand to be paid tuition if we study on Christmas, because he also taught it and was once a great scholar. You see how the two identities get conflated, and will wish to be honored for that. Such accounts also emphasize the physicality of Judaism's Christmas visitor, describing burlesque battles between him and his victims. These more unguarded sources thus confirm that it was not merely some abstract representation of Ben Stade, which proponents of these customs feared, but the revenant was a distinctly embodied actor who returned from the dead. A very physical and scary thing. And the same idea is that the proper revenant had appeared to Scrooge, passed through the door, but then had real chains, which Scrooge was to hold on to when he flew out amongst into the night to see the rest of the Hitzonim, which Scrooge was destined to join. So there's a lot of Hitzonim tradition there. Charles Dickens has been definitely influenced by it. There was a lot of that culture, but we can understand this because at that time, and a lot of people say that Charles Dickens sort of invented Christmas for the British, but at that time, many Jews were starting to come into London, escaping pogroms in Russia. So it's not really that surprising that their traditions may have become observed and something of interest to Christians who were disenchanted with the Western Church, who were looking for something more authentic, more Judaic. We know people like John Locke were heavily influenced. He was a proper Noahide. And there was a lot of influence on people who were interested in being Noahides. There have always been Noahides throughout history, but they've never been a very well organized community, unfortunately. A bit difficult to organize a community amongst Noahides, who are often going to be sort of the odd ones out from their community anyway. But it's so essentially important for Noahides to become a community. Even if you are the odd ones out, you do have to come together. Otherwise, you are just an individualist and still sort of worshipping yourself, rather than actually being sincerely interested in finding the truth. You're just trying to be an individualist, someone who's different, a rebel or something like that, someone who's quite different. It's so important to prove that you're not a rebel and join a community like the Bey Abedan. But we have had so many people who've come into Bey Abedan and left because they just don't really get the idea of community. And it's strange that after they've left, how few of them keep in touch with each other, because they never really glued. They never really were interested in community. They were only always over interested in themselves. So you have to be very careful of that. If you are a Noahide or attracted to being a Messianic Noahide, you've got to fight against that individualism. Which is a great thing in that it helps you open your eyes to try and find the truth and discern between the truth and the falsehood, and identify the falsehood in Christianity or in Islam, to try and find the true Messianic faith. So you do need that personality to get that far, but then you're going to have to love people more than yourself. Love the community more than yourself. Otherwise, you will be an eternal goat. You're not going to ever find the flock, and you're never going to become a sheep. So you've got to make that transition at some point. So anyway, this is where we get the tradition of consuming a lot of garlic, which wards off hitzonim in Jewish tradition before going to the toilet. That is actually true. And as they say, there's this saying, see that Talui does not pull you in. That is the hanged one. Okay, so when you go, but in those days, the toilets were more like at the end of the garden. There's some kind of pit at the end of the garden, which you could actually fall into if you were not too careful, especially in the darkest night. So people would actually go to the toilet hand in hand, and one would wait outside while the other did their business, just to make sure that they were the one who was not pulled in by Ben Stada, by the Jewish Krampus. And there we have a cartoon sort of reflecting that. Okay, so the Teliyah, the Baraita, which we've been talking about throughout this show. Most commonly on this night, instead of regular Torah, Jews would read, as mentioned, a Baraita, known as the Maseh Toleh. In fact, we wouldn't read it, we'd do it from memory, or we'd play a card game to do it, or the Asham Talui, referred to by Rashi as the Teliyah Yeshu, to repel him, since he does not like the story of why and when the New Testament was compiled. Hence, yet another term for the Tukufat of Tevet is Tolenacht, Tele night, being a reference to the story and to the North Star, the hook on which the zodiac hangs, which is at its highest point. The North Star is at its highest point in the sky in the Northern Hemisphere on this night, and regarded as the source of Ben Stada's only skill, which is astronomy. He used astronomy to predict when the moon would be in a particular phase or in a particular place at a particular time, to be able to predict an eclipse or a partial eclipse, to be able to predict where a star would be or when a star would be occulted by a new moon, things like that. And that made people think that he had the power to make stars disappear and reappear at will, and do all sorts of things. Like he had control over these things. He could also control exactly when the light was going to shine in a particular place, they thought, from the sun. But it wasn't. It was just he had studied this, and it looked like he had supernatural powers. So in fact, the source of all of his power is really astronomy, the science of astronomy. Hence, despite the academic derivation of nittel from Latin natalis, yet another erroneous folk etymology, or pun, links it to hatalui, the hanged one, as a reference to the Yiddish Krampus, because he was hanged, nitleh, which they argue either evolved or was deliberately blurred into the term nittel. The hanged man, of course, is depicted on these tarot cards in these modern days. The tarot cards come from the they're a French sect of Gnostics who actually worship Ben Stada, but the cards themselves come from the Italian game Trumps or Trionfi, which tells you can use these cards to tell the story of Ben Stada's life, how it comes about. And so we also have a deck of Triumphi, and that's the card game we play. We don't study the Torah directly from a book, but we use the cards and put them down in order of pictures. We have different games to arrange to try and find the picture. Who can tell the picture? The next picture or the previous picture. If they have the card, they can put it down, they can trump it, and they can collect the cards. And you tell the story of the Teliyah using these cards. And this is the picture of the hanged man when he was finally hung from a carob stalk or from a cabbage stalk upside down by his leg. So it's an important aspect of the oral Torah that one day, Tolenacht, that is the 24th of December, would be converted to serve the purpose of Hashem towards salvation, despite every attempt from the other side to hold Tolenacht for damnation. And so when the Messianic Noahides observe that, and more Messianic Noahides observe a holy and happy Christmas Eve, then we would say that it's finally, the forces of evil have finally been conquered. But still, we have a long way to go, since there is a lot of Saturnalia going on to this very day. But I hope that those of you who are listening to this, which is only 5 of you right now who are live listening to this, I hope that you will be inspired to try and follow a more holy Christmas Eve than has been popularized in the social media. So now, some other customs. As mentioned, besides decorating Christmas trees or Hanukkah bushes, celibacy, bittul Torah, practicing loving kindness and charity, reading the Toleh and eating garlicky food, keeping vigil to midnight devotions. These days, there are many Eastern Yiddish folkways observed as ritual protection against the dangerous hitzonim or supernatural forces that hold sway on the last day of Saturnalia, the darkest time of the year. For example, protective covers. Now, this is a bit of Torah again, which you should observe if you want your righteousness to surpass that of the Pharisees. Protective covers should be placed over holy books or vessels containing liquids and food to protect them from tuma, ritual impurity, associated with the Tekufat of Tevet. Other traditional practices among Jews at this time include playing dreidel, trumps, as I just described, or chess, making toilet paper even, reading secular texts, accounting, sewing, and singing songs to scare off hitzonim until the midnight candle lighting tonight, when Torah study can resume. Or some people, we did it last night, but if some people will do it tonight. The Beitei Midrashim, the madrasas, were closed early and children stayed home from Cheder. Today is not a time to study. They don't go out today. While men refrained from studying holy texts. People stayed indoors, sometimes shuttering their windows against the worst of winter. Children played cards, otherwise only permitted during Hanukkah when games of chance are allowed. Cards at this time are a game of choice. Chess also joins the game of cards as a popular pastime among those who participate in these traditions. In fact, even some of the more austere rabbis in Hasidic groups have been known to pass the hours until midnight candle lighting immersed in quiet chess stratagems. In fact, playing chess on nittel is a whole custom in true Hasidic fashion with deepful meanings. For those living at a rabbinical cemetery, Nittel Katan and Gadol are the only 2 days of the year that Talmudim are allowed to play board games in the main study hall and listen to all tapes and CDs. The Rebbe himself of the yeshiva might even play chess publicly on Nittel. For preteens these days, it is the only night that allows free, non-guilt-driven access to watch home videos of family weddings, speeches, and events, recorded gatherings of Hasidic rebbes, and at times National Geographic films. Nittel was the only night of the year that not only aren't Jews driven to feel guilty if we waste our time doing anything else besides studying Holy Scriptures, but are actually forbidden from study and must waste our time. As a result, it is the only time of the year that even the ultra-religious play games guilt-free, at least to some extent. For Jewish children, Nittel is a special fun day, mainly for having family time, perhaps going to movies to see the Christmas blockbuster, and eating garlicky food has evolved into eating Chinese garlic dishes, which we had a lot of last night. All that, and as already mentioned, Jews, like Christians, not only decorate trees, abstain from marital relations, practice loving kindness and charity, keep vigil till midnight, devotions, eat a lot of garlic, and shun Krampus figure around the solstice, and played games at least until lighting candle for midnight study before going to bed, a tradition reminiscent of the Christingle. There you go. If you might have seen one of those, it's called a Christingle. And that is, as I said, also from a Judaic origin, lighting the candle at midnight. The parallels are striking. As already mentioned, the darkest night vigilia ends at midnight tonight, and the hiatus on studying the Torah ends with the beginning of the 8-day Kaleid, Yiddish for calendar, i.e. Christmas celebration established by Adam to celebrate the lengthening of days. The protective covers are removed, and the mitzvah was observed to begin each new season, like calendar, with a fresh supply of sweet water, as brought down by the 10th century High Gaon, which I'll be going out to get later today. There is also some halakha about when to give presents during Kaleid, as recorded by Israel Isserlin in 1390. He lived from 1390 to 1460. In Austria, mentioned in the Terumas Hadershen, Siman 195, which is a response of the Terumat Hadershen 195. And there's the question and answer. Question. In many cities, it is the custom for Jews to send gifts to priests and nobles on the 8th day after Nittel, when they make their new year. That's the new year for trees. Should we be concerned about the danger of this or not? Answer. It appears that we should be careful regarding this practice and not send it on the actual day of the festival, lest they think we are celebrating, but rather on a day before or after. That's Nittel Nacht or Nittel Gadol. This is also the earliest mention of the two Nittels, or even the three Nittels. the day before Nittel being Nittel Katan, and the day after being Nittel Gadol. Actually, it should be the day before Nittel Katan being Nittel Nacht, and the day after being Nittel Gadol. Interestingly, this response, with several others on the topic dealing with apostates and Gentiles, was omitted from the original Terumas Hadershim because, apparently, of the censor. The responses were printed at the end of the Sefer in certain editions. The preferred hilchos for Jews is to send gifts to non-Jews on the 7th day, eve of the 8th of calendar, rather than Nittel Day itself. In accordance with Israelin's ruling, the Rima, Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah 141, part 12, writes, if a person wishes to send a gift to a Gentile on the 8th day, after Nittel, which they call New Year's, when they view it as a good omen, if they receive the gift, he should send it the night before, on the eve. And these words are in italics, though, were censored from the original part. So this part here, there, was actually censored in later editions. I don't know why they censor these things these days. They always blame Christian censors, but it doesn't make any sense because there were no Christian censors in later editions. Anyway, this is exactly what Polish Christians do on Vigilia. So if that's not celebrating Christmas, then what is? Hence, despite the recent attempts from some quarters to suggest the opposite, Nittel is clearly not such a radical departure from the Christian tradition at all, but this isn't to suggest that it is somehow less Jewish. Many have written about this aspect of Judaism as if it were nothing but Eastern Yiddish folklore about Christmas time, evidencing the awe inspired by Jesus. But such approaches have actually done more harm to Judaism than good. Thus, while secular academics like Rebecca Scharbach argue that this is because Nittelnacht is actually a Jewish adaptation of the Christmas traditions, the believer in Judaism is forced to an alternative explanation. For us, the similarities are due to the survival of a folk memory among Messianic Noahides concerning the fallout from sins of Yossel Pondrik, Joseph Pandra, with whom begins the Toleh recounted by Jews at least for over 18 centuries on the last day of Saturnalia before midnight candle lighting brings calendar. This history is a tale of two unequal communities buffeted between social conditions that drew them together despite the distinctive communal needs that pushed them apart. The customary system fulfilled a widespread and urgent need within the early modern Jewish communities of Central and Eastern Europe. It was dangerously dark, deathly cold, food was scarce, and hungry wild animals surrounded the shtetls at this time of the year. And it's important to think about the shtetls. So it was best to have get-togethers at home. And the rest, really, is just sophistry. If you think about it very carefully, you realize there are so many things that we have to be cautious about at this time of the year that it's really, all of this really kind of makes sense. In the Jewish shtetl, they don't really have to be worried about goyim doing anything around the shtetl. There are very few, if any, goyim in the shtetl, and those goyim in the shtetl would be actually Noahides. So it's not really a response to Christian practices. It's something which we had to do ourselves anyway because we were afraid of the forces of winter at that time becoming stronger. And so we got together and did these things to weaken the forces of winter, and our tradition passed on to those through those Noahides to other Christians as a whole and became popularized. And that's why even the Christmas tree is not something which is widespread outside of Germanic people, German culture, until the 1800s. So things are still evolving. As the influence of Judaic practice on the Christian world with regards to this time of the year is still moving forward. So we might see more and more of it coming out. Maybe there'll be more focus on Krampus in the future. I've seen a little bit about that starting to come out, and there might be more understanding of like the eve of Christmas Eve being for Krampus and being holy and keeping away from celebrations, and then Christmas Eve itself being a time to have a celebration and celebrate the light coming into the world following the darkest time of the year. So there you go. That is a very Jewish Christmas. I hope you found it interesting. I can see there are no questions in the chat there, so I suppose everybody had all the answers given to them during the show. If you have any further comments, please do post them underneath the the video in the comment section. Feel free to write to us if you want to be in touch with other Messianic Noahides. And so that really leaves nothing left for me to say to you except I wish you all a very good nittel, and hope you will have a blessed and holy calendar following on from that. God bless you all. Take care and Merry Christmas. Shalom.